It came about partly because the class I was working with at the time were very self-aware, very reflective, and we created a sense of community learning that was quite different. And this was at a time when the government policy was getting tighter and tighter, so it was very regimented how we taught and what we taught. And it seemed to go against everything that I believed in at the time. But the children were very aware that when they left me at the end of the year and went on to another class, that they may be taught in a different way. And the children began critiquing other learning theories, and they wrote one of their own. And they became very sort of introspective and very supportive of each other. What they wanted to create was a space where they could reflect and they could find and explore themselves as a person and as a learner, and what that meant with how they interacted with the curriculum and what was happening in school. But it was a space that was safe for them, and they could share what they wanted, but they didn't have to share anything if they didn't want to. There was a space that they could hold and continue and sort of take forward on their own, even when they weren't with me. So as an example, I had one little boy who had a really traumatic background, and he could remember it all. He spent a lot of time exploring himself and trying to understand himself, and that it wasn't his fault what had happened, although he was only 7.5 at the time. He really needed that space to control things and explore things in his own way. He was part of a small group that came up with the idea that Belle Wallace's task wheel wasn't appropriate, and she should have moved her thinking on because their thinking had moved on. They came up with this idea that it should be 3-dimensional. I spoke to him a couple of years later. He'd gone through 2 classes at this point, and I literally bumped into him one lunchtime when I was on duty. And he said he still kept spirals, and it had created a space inside of himself that he could think in, and he could play with ideas and hold this, where that idea of playing with things came from originally. He said to me that he thought about the task wheel, and he now thought it was 5-dimensional, purely because his understanding of time and space had developed, so it couldn't be 3-dimensional anymore. So the basis around spirals, it was a practical way to encourage them to be reflective, to hold things that were important to them, but to be able to hold a space and sort of explore the world around them and the ideas that they were playing with, but independently without any input from me. Just a sort of a practical way for them to become more confident, more independent. So there was basically 4 sections within it. The children could format it in any way that they wanted to. Quite a lot of them went for A5 size ring binders or all sorts of things that they played around with. The first part, it was just called Dear Me. Very simple prompts and pages, just got them to think about themselves as a person. So not only the self that they showed the world, but having an understanding that sometimes there's a self that we keep hidden, and how we interact with the world and our experiences impact on who we are and the person that we let others see. So that was just about exploring themselves personally and privately. And the only condition for that section was that they had to date anything that they did. We used to bring endless things in and stick things in, and they'd make videos and put the discs in and all sorts. The next section was called Prism. So that was more some academic, some sort of thinking academic-y skills, but general ones and sort of life skills. And it was just prompts for them to think about skills like areas around communication, whether that's asking questions or an online. So it was a bank of skills, if you like, they would reflect on and use and become more independent with. And they would collect evidence against those skills. Then there was a project section, and there was workbooks, and it evolved so that one day a week the curriculum was dropped totally in the school where I was working, and the children had responsibility for planning their own learning for that day. So it was all the skills in Prism, it was all the skills in Dear Me that they knew about themselves that enabled them to develop projects, and that was using the task wheel as a framework, if you like. So they developed projects, and there would be a really loose brief that they would have to conform to over, say, a period of 10 weeks. So there would be a product, perhaps, that they had to produce. And that could be anything from a Greek urn to a mobile, to whatever they wanted it to be. Some sort of presentation, and that could be a radio thing, it could be a video, it could be a PowerPoint, it could have been a display, depending on what we were doing. And then me search. So instead of research, it was about me search, pulling those threads together. So in a reflective, living theory sort of way, it was about what are the values that are important to me, how am I as a learner, how am I as a person, and refining those areas down, linking them together. What questions does that raise for me? What do I want to do next?
Then you went on to think, how could you engage other teachers in doing this?
That was a step on from it. We talk about schools being learning communities all the time, but we're being hypocritical because we're not. It's just the children learn in their own way. Yeah. Perhaps the adults might have a little bit of a research group going. It's usually only the teachers that are invited, but we are a learning community because that's what we label, and it is a tokenistic gesture. So the idea behind Spirals ultimately was to create that sense of learning community, so that you would have research groups running, so that the cleaner was welcome, the school secretary was welcome, but the children were equally welcome with the adults. By using living theory, you can have a methodology that fits with the whole school, enables the teachers to think about their values as a practitioner and as their part of the school community. It enables the children really to have a voice about how they're learning and what they're learning, and whether their values tie in with what the school is saying, and to be independent. The idea behind it was producing materials that would support whatever phase and whatever part of the school you're in, that Spirals will work for you in the same way. So there's a leadership version, teaching and learning version, as well as a secondary, primary and infant version.
It's very much in keeping with what Ada would have called democratic education. The children in the school I worked in did do an awful lot of things. The lunchtime clubs, they ran themselves, but they thought them up. They ran competitions, they ran fundraisers. They had a team of year sixes who did all the vetting. They had to go and convince this committee that what they were going to do was safe, and they'd thought it through, etc. It was loosely overseen by the adults and as the health and safety person. So something like that really floats my boat, particularly that idea of children doing research.
Joy, I was already picturing, how can I apply this with the ASD child I'm working with, especially that when he's talking about himself, he is like, even at his level, maybe I can work something from that. I love the idea. He's still mixing up the pronouns. So it's going to be interesting when you name that spiral Dear Me. It's going to be interesting how he will work around that. And definitely he needs more work on that to be more grounded in the feeling of me, who I am. I already imagine how that can help me in my practice. Thank you.
What I find quite interesting, whether you're working as a teacher with a class or a therapist with a child or a group or whatever role you're in, you're researching. I started writing my first assignment for my master's, and I was telling the children that I was learning as well. And one of the children asked me, well, how can you write about learning without us? And that was the point when that sense of sort of co-creation, and how can I research without them? How can I look at my practice without their voice being integral to what I'm doing? They needed to understand the methodology that I was using at the time, and it needed to work for me, but it needed to work for the class as well, which is where it all started and come. I don't think I ever really thought about it standing in their shoes, and I don't think they ever saw it about standing in mine. But it was that sense of we can both do each of these roles. Sometimes I'm the learner on my own. Sometimes we learn together. Sometimes I can lead the group. It was just a sense of shared journey. It wasn't ever my journey or their journey. It was always our journey. So I don't think we ever thought about it as separate or how do they perceive it? How do I perceive it? It was how do we? And they truly believed that they were experts in their own learning and in how children learn, that they tackled it really confidently, came up with their own learning theory completely on their own. It wasn't a guided session by me. I sat back and one of the children ran the session. It's the confidence of children. They're not daunted or get too deep about it. It's a fascinating process once you get young children researching.
It sounds like you created such a great environment for learning, an environment with equality, and that's why confidence was possible for them.
When you were talking about how you saw the children, and I thought, gosh, it's exactly how alongside-ness emerged for me as a health visitor with adults. I was working with families because I had my own agenda of what I wanted to get across here, and it was about non-violent communication at the time. And I realised through living theory, I couldn't research how do I do this thing? How do I make these people stop hitting their kids? And my research and my practice were one and the same. I had to see the families as being fellow researchers. And by seeing them as researchers trying to solve their problem, whatever it was, and me thinking, how can I support you to be the kind of parent you really want to be, even though things are getting in the way, it changed the relationship. I told a few parents that I was researching my own practice, and so they did become more active in helping me understand. That's where alongside-ness came from. I saw myself as standing alongside. So it was a bit more Adlerian in ways I don't think I understood at the time, seeing the world from their point of view, what they were going to need in order to make these changes, because you can't make people change if they don't want to, which they didn't want to, stop. You give them other ways to think about that they could use instead, because that's what it was like in 1989, because there weren't other ways.
So you meet somebody, then you come towards each other, and then you go along together. And that really fits with Robin's alongside. So you actually go alongside somebody, encouraging someone self-determining.
Except I just saw it as different from what Joy's talking about, because Joy is setting the scene where the children can do it themselves.
Yes.
You do give them some clues, some helpful bits, but it sounds like they didn't even ask for those things because they believed they could work it out for themselves. So it's a bit different from alongside-ness, where I had the public health agenda, stop people hitting each other, which the parents didn't have, and they didn't necessarily invite me in. Psychotherapy, it's different again, because the people are actually asking you for your professional help. Help, I can't do this by myself. So they're asking for you, but you create equal relationships, and you are in a certain role of power, I suppose you could say. So it's different again, isn't it?
It's not supposed to be power.
No, I know it's not.
Not saying it isn't.
You can use power usefully, though.
But there is something there that's kind of... So we're not there to help people. We're not there to support people. We're there to encourage people to determine for themselves. But we do offer things. And I know that sounds very idealistic, but that's the aim.
This is how it is with the stuff that we are discussing. Sometimes we open up something, and next time it becomes more clear. We need some time to reflect or things to settle in our mind, and it becomes clear.
Is the next step then for Joy to go beyond the description to the explanation, connect back with the values you've expressed before, Joy, and see how far they enable you to explain the educational influence of what it is to create and support a learning community, and what that means as a learning community, supporting each other and ourselves. Jack?
It's been a pleasure tonight. Yes, really great.
It's been a treat. Just hearing Joy and you and she, the synergy between you seems to be exactly what you've been talking about, Joy.